Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a detailed look at how the new Sigma art lenses and Sony FE mount, how they play out, particularly when compared to Canon EF version of the same lens. In this case, we're going to use the 50mm f1.4 art, an excellent lens, and one of, I'm sure, that will be very welcome on Sony FE. But we're going to look at how it compares to the Canon EF versions when they are mounted on Sigma's MC11 mount converter on Sony FE. And so we're going to look at a lot of different things as a part of this comparison series. We're going to look at some of the physical changes, some of the handling. We'll look at things like the autofocus and the image quality and autofocus in tracking and in portraits and even in video tracking. And so let's jump in. We're going to look at a number of different things, a variety of scenarios here today. So join me as we take a closer look at new Sigma Art Series lenses on Sony FE. So I thought we would start today in the kitchen to see just exactly what it is that Sigma has cooked up with these new FE versions of their Art Series lenses. So I've got the Canon EF version of the 50mm f1.4 Art. I've also got a Sigma MC11, and we'll use that as a comparison point. I have the new FE version of the 50mm f1.4 Art. And then to round out the trio, just to give a native comparison, I have got the excellent, top of the class Sony Zeiss Planar 50mm f1.4. So one thing that becomes quickly apparent here, if you actually have these side by side, is that the dimensions and the basic profile of these two are almost identical with the MC11 attached. Now the MC11 itself does have a bit of a taper to it, so it does very slightly change the lens profile. But essentially, this is the MC11 type adapter baked into an actual external shell. And, and Sigma basically doesn't try to hide that in a sense, in that I took this off of their website. And one of the things that they note is that there is the mount now has, basically no wobble. And so there are a few things that are tweaked here, and I will highlight those. Now, Sigma has been a little bit coy about the dimensions, and as I went out to try to find specifications about the FE versions, I've had a hard time coming up with them to some degree. And for example, a lot of times I take stats off of B&H Photo, and what I see there is that everything that's listed is identical with the Canon EF mount. So clearly that's not the case. You can't add on, electronics and an adapter into this and also add on a much longer lens. So as you can see, if I remove the MC11 here and just have the bare lens, and I'll take the cap off for comparison, you can see you've got a physically larger lens. And that is the unfortunate thing about this whole situation, in that rather than getting smaller lenses for mirrorless, we are in fact getting bigger lenses. So let's just find out here. We'll do some comparisons ourselves and find out just exactly what we've got in terms of the weight as we compare these things. So I'm keeping front and rear caps on, just as our standard. And so if I use the Sony lens, I have got on the scale 810 grams. That Sony lens is listed at 778 grams. So that's obviously without the caps. So caps attached, MC11 plus the Canon EF version. I'm coming up with 970 grams. That lens, just the bare Canon EF lens, is listed at 815 grams. So if we put the new FE version on there with the caps on there, we come up with 912 grams. So let's just double check that again. 912 versus 970 with the MC11. And so once again, grand total, I got 913 this time. So the good news is that there is a weight savings as compared to having the MC11 attached. the bad news is that we are coming in at a good 100 grams plus heavier than what the heaviest native 50 millimeter option previously was. And so we have got a physically longer lens and a physically heavier lens. And up front, we've got a 77 millimeter front filter thread versus a 72 millimeter front filter thread. And and again, I'm going to keep all the cap things on here just for a kind of a consistent standard. And so I am measuring out here at roughly 145 centimeters in length from the front of the front cap to the back cap versus about 130 millimeters in length for the Sony lens. And so, we've got about 15 millimeters, about a ½ inch of extra length there. And so, all in all, this certainly is a physically larger lens and it is a physically heavier lens. Now, there's a couple of other things that I do want to note as a part of this upgrade. Whereas the original Art Series lens and an EF, Canon EF or a Nikon F mount, you will find no kind of gasket, no kind of weather sealing. That's a more recent Sigma development, something that I knocked in the past. What I did note is while it's not huge, there is a little rubber gasket that is here that will help to seal the lens mount. And once again, when I looked at the actual website, I did see that it noted that the language is pretty specific in that there was a gasket at to help to be dust and moisture or splash proof, but it's very specific at the lens mount. And so the physical change here is the addition of the gasket to help seal at the lens mount. But I don't think that there is any kind of new internal seals at switches or at focus motor there, or focus ring, I should say. And so our physical change is that there is the addition of at the gasket. Okay, I'm here with my son Samuel, and he was willing to pose to be the model for the section when I decided to test out how IAF works and how consistent autofocus would be across the three lenses when shooting portraits using IF, which of course is going to be a very important function of these lenses. It's important that it works right. So after taking a number of shots, what we did is I was looking for repeatability. So I had Sam face the camera, just a kind of a basic straight-on portrait using available light. I didn't want to get too technical with lighting to make it too simple for it. In very high contrast studio type lighting, it's actually much easier to get things right. But just using available light, and so I shot 5 frames, 5 or 6, depending on whether I counted right, with him facing the camera straight on. And so IAF, it's best case scenario for that, from about 8 feet away. And then in between each shot, I would defocus, kind of focus down, bring the camera back up. I wanted repeatability. And so then in the second series, I had him turn profile towards the camera to where the eye was only partially visible, because I find that to be more challenging for IAF. So what I found, I shot with the FE version, with the version mounted on the MC11, and then with the actual Sony Zeiss lens. And what I found is that with all 3 of them, I got fairly good results. And it's a pretty amazing thing to take a brand new lens out of a bag, throw it on a camera, and at f1.4 get great focus results. So I mean, kudos to the kind of focus system that's in these Sony bodies that enables that. But beyond that, I found that with each one of them, straight on, there were 4 exquisitely focused, and then 1 that was a little bit less well focused. When you turn to the profile, the version mounted on the MC11, the Canon EF version, it definitely had the least misses. And so if you turn your head profile, instead of getting this eye right here, which is what I wanted, sometimes I would get at the bridge of the nose. And in a couple occasions, I even saw some of the eyelashes from the far eye, which would have actually not even been in sight of the camera, were actually a little bit better focused than, that front edge, I should say the leading edge of the eyelashes that should have been the eye in focus. And so I definitely did see some back focus focus in those situations. Beyond that, it was even noticeable from the position that he was sitting at, there was a noticeable addition of noise when using the version on the MC11 as opposed to the FE version, which was essentially silent in operation for that AFC and IAF type work. It was very similar to the Sony and that kind of behavior. But the MC11, it was like you could constantly hear some noises of like it was making minute adjustments all the time. And so the byproduct of that is that it's a more disconcerting process. Obviously it worked, if not as well, it worked quite well, but it was a little bit more disconcerting because of the amount of noise and the feeling that it's never quite sure when focus is achieved. And so for shooting portraits, I would definitely say that the FE version is the preferred way to go if you're shooting on Sony bodies and wanting to use IAF. So as you can see, there are some minor physical differences between these two versions. You do get added on a little bit of weather sealing there, which is certainly an advantage. In terms of the basic handling, you also get a little bit of real world weight savings compared to using the MC11 version. As we also saw in our portrait autofocus comparison, we found that we got pretty similar performance with IAF to the native Sony Zeiss lens. And really though, however, with the MC11 adapted version, we got a fairly similar performance as well, just maybe a little bit of a lag behind what we saw with the native FE mount. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap this up for this episode, and I'll follow it up in a couple of days with part 2. And in part 2, we're going to cover things like tracking performance, if you're trying to track higher speed action, and see how it works in an AF servo kind of mode for that. We'll compare both of those along with the actual Sony Zeiss lens as a benchmark once again. We're also going to look at if there's any kind of image quality differences in the next version of this, and if you're losing anything by using the adapter or gaining anything by using the native mount. And I'll also give you my summation of, what I think you should do depending on the kit that you have in that episode. But as for today, if you want to look in the description down below, you can find buying links for either one of these versions. And of course, if you haven't already, you can follow me on social media, you can become a subscriber, all of those things. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.